Now imagine a world where truth walks softly but carries the power to shake empires. A world where silence is golden, and yet one man chose to speak. He didn't whisper, he roared. Not with noise, but with conviction. Today, we don't just listen to words. We witness courage. We don't just hear a speech. We stand before a reckoning. Truth sounds like rebellion when spoken in a room full of lies. It doesn't matter how softly it's spoken. It doesn't matter if it comes with humility or with thunder. When a man walks into a hall of power and dares to say what everyone else is too afraid to whisper, the room shifts, the walls close in, the silence thickens, eyes glance away. Because in that moment, truth becomes a mirror, and nobody likes what they see. You see, when lies have made a home, truth feels like an intruder. And the longer those lies have lived, the more violent their defense becomes. They wrap themselves around titles, suits, traditions, protocols. They parade through press conferences and handshake deals, posing as diplomacy. But every now and then, someone stands up, not to shout, not to boast, but to simply say, this is not right. And when they do, it sounds like heresy. Egos bristle, agendas rattle, cameras freeze, because the system was never built to hold truth. It was built to hold power. And the two don't always live in the same house. That's why when someone like Jaishankar speaks, not as a puppet, not as a pawn, but as a man, the room grows quiet, not out of respect, out of fear. Fear that the mask might fall, that the story might change, that people might start to think, and thinking, that's dangerous business in a world that prefers obedience. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't need an army. It doesn't not need applause. It stands alone and still casts a shadow that stretches across borders, and the moment it's spoken, it starts to unravel the carefully tailored suits of deception. You'll see men squirm, smiles tighten, questions shift, because truth doesn't ask for comfort, it asks for courage. Jaishankar didn't raise his voice, he didn't pound the table. He just lit a match in a room soaked in denial, and that match burned louder than 1,000 speeches, because it reminded everyone the emperor might be naked, and the world has been clapping anyway for years, for decades. You see, when a man tells the truth, it forces others to choose. Do they echo it or do they crush it? That's what truth does. It demands a response. It exposes the quiet cowards who've grown used to the dark, and it awakens the silent watchers who've waited for someone to speak first. But let's not pretend it's easy. Speaking the truth is lonely work. It makes you a target before it makes you a leader. It earns you enemies before it earns you followers. It draws lines, burns bridges, and tests your spine. But in a world soaked in staged narratives and scripted outrage, that honesty becomes a revolution. Not with bullets, but with boldness. And maybe that's why people called it stunning. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was rare. A breath of something real in a room built on pretend. And when something real walks in, the fate doesn't know where to look. Lies need darkness to thrive. Truth walks in and flips on the light. It doesn't argue, it doesn't negotiate, it just stands there, daring you to blink. So when Jaishankar chose to speak, when he looked power in the eye and chose facts over flattery, clarity over comfort, He didn't just make a point, he made a mark. And the world noticed, not because the words were poetic, but because they were precise, not because they were loud, but because they were real. Because in a world trained to clap for actors, it's jarring to hear someone unscripted, someone who doesn't sell fear, someone who doesn't fold, someone who reminds us all diplomacy isn't theater, it's truth told bravely, even if your voice shakes, even if you stand alone, because when the room is full of lies, the one who tells the truth isn't just a speaker, he's a storm carrier. He's saying what must be said, even when no one wants to hear it. It's not the kind of courage you find on battlefields or in history books filled with tales of flags and victory parades. No, this kind is quieter, more dangerous. It lives in rooms where everyone knows the truth, but no one dares speak it. It walks into meetings where silence is protocol and honesty is considered impolite. It shows up in the form of a steady voice, choosing conviction over comfort, clarity over consensus. As when you speak the truth that no one wants to hear, you're not just breaking the silence, you're breaking the spell of safety, of status quo, of well-rehearsed ignorance. And that right there is what makes people uncomfortable. Not because your words are wrong, but because they cut too close, because they reveal too much. You see, the world doesn't lack for intelligence, it lacks for courage, the kind that makes a man stand tall in a room full of nodding heads and say, we need to look at this differently. The kind that forces uncomfortable truths into the open where they can no longer be hidden behind statistics or slogans. The kind that risks everything, position, reputation, even peace of mind, just to be honest. People don't like discomfort. They avoid it, silence it, dress it up in new words that don't sting so much. But courage doesn't care for cosmetics. Courage speaks in raw, unfiltered tones. It doesn't shout. It doesn't seek to humiliate. It simply refuses to lie. Here's a reason why the ones who speak the truth often stand alone. Because before truth is celebrated, it is resisted. Before it's quoted, it's questioned. Before it's understood, it's rejected. And yet, the courageous say it anyway. Not because they like confrontation, but because they cannot live in pretense. Because the weight of silence is heavier than the backlash of truth. When Jaishankar spoke, he didn't speak for applause. He didn't check to see if the room was ready. He didn't wait for permission, because courage doesn't wait. It acts. It knows that timing is rarely perfect, but truth delayed is justice denied. He chose to say what others only thought, what others buried, what others sugarcoated. He said it plainly, calmly, but firmly. And you could feel the discomfort ripple across the room. That's how you know courage is present. It makes people shift in their seats. It makes them avoid your eyes. It makes them rethink everything they thought they knew. Not because you attacked them, but because you awakened something in them. Courage doesn't ask, will this be popular? It asks, is this right? That's a hard question in a world built on optics and diplomacy measured in how well you avoid offense. But real diplomacy, the kind that moves nations, doesn't dodge the truth. It delivers it with respect, Yes, but also with resolve. Sometimes saying what must be said means breaking ranks. It means disappointing allies. It means being misquoted, misunderstood, maybe even maligned. But the courageous know that silence in the face of falsehood is complicity. And so they speak, not to be heroes, but to stay human. Because there comes a moment, maybe once in a generation, when someone steps forward, not to echo the room, but to challenge it. Not to blend in, but to break through. That moment is not safe. It is not smooth, but it is necessary. And when you witness it, when you hear those words spoken with quiet fire, you realize you're not just listening to a statement. You're witnessing a stand, a line being drawn, not in arrogance, but in principle, not to divide, but to remind us. Truth doesn't need permission, and courage is what gives it a voice. Diplomacy without integrity is just well-dressed cowardice. It wears a tie, rehearses its lines, and walks into every room with a smile wide enough to mask its spine. It shakes hands with one man while stepping on the neck of another. It speaks in polished sentences, filled with polite lies, dressed up as mutual interest. It bows to power, not principle, and in doing so, it forgets what diplomacy was meant to be, a bridge built on truth, not a curtain to hide behind. When integrity leaves the room, diplomacy becomes performance, a hollow ritual, an expensive stage play where nothing real gets said and nothing real gets done. Leaders nod, reporters write, agreements are signed, but underneath the gold lettering and press photos, nothing has changed, because diplomacy without truth is a game of delay, delay of justice, delay of action, delay of consequences. But what happens when someone walks in and refuses to play the game? What happens when a voice speaks without bending, without flattering, without hiding behind the language of neutrality? That's when diplomacy becomes dangerous, not because of the words used, but because of the truth behind them. And in that moment, the room doesn't see a diplomat, it sees a disruptor. That's what Jaishankar did. He stepped into a space ruled by scripted gestures and selective silence and told the truth, not in anger, not in arrogance, but with clarity. And that clarity shook the illusion, because suddenly diplomacy wasn't comfortable anymore. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't safe, it was real. You see, when diplomacy lacks integrity, it makes deals that look fair on paper but bleed people in practice. It prioritizes optics over outcomes. It punishes the honest and rewards the obedient. It turns a blind eye to suffering as long as the market stays steady. It tolerates injustice because it's inconvenient to confront. That's not diplomacy. That's more collapse in a tailored suit. Real diplomacy is hard because it requires more than charm. It requires character. It demands the courage to say, this is wrong, even when it costs you. It means standing alone in a room full of allies if the truth asks you to. It means protecting your values more fiercely than your image. It means not just making peace, but making it worth something. But in today's world, too many have mistaken diplomacy for damage control. They speak peace while selling weapons. They condemn violence in one sentence and justify it in the next. They act shocked at injustice while privately funding it. And in all of this, the people watching, the ones whose lives hang in the balance, they see the lie. They feel the betrayal. Because people don't need more speeches. They need spine. They need leaders who aren't just trying to avoid conflict, but who are willing to confront the roots of it, who know that true diplomacy doesn't mean everyone walks away smiling. It means everyone walks away knowing the truth was spoken. Jaishankar didn't walk into the room to please. He walked in to represent. Represent a nation, a principle, a line that could not be crossed without response. He didn't drape his honesty in soft phrases. He didn't bend his message to fit the comfort level of his audience. He said what needed to be said, and in doing so, he reminded the world, diplomacy without truth is not peace, it's permission. Permission for oppression to continue, for lies to flourish, for double standards to grow roots. That kind of diplomacy doesn't prevent war, it preserves imbalance. And imbalance, if left unchecked, always leads to unrest. So when you see a leader reject the applause, reject the polished lie, and instead choose integrity, you're not witnessing disrespect. You're witnessing real diplomacy, the kind that doesn't beg for acceptance, the kind that doesn't dress cowardice and protocol, the kind that leaves the room changed, not just entertained. Because diplomacy, at its best, is not the art of silence. It is the art of truth, spoken wisely, but never compromised. And without that truth, all we're left with are actors, not leaders. The world changes when one man refuses to pretend it's okay. Not when he screams, not when he riots, but when he simply stops pretending. When he looks at the chaos, the corruption, the quiet suffering cloaked in ceremony, and he says, no, this isn't fine. Not because he wants attention, not because he's looking for applause, but because his conscience no longer fits inside the costume. Silence. Pretending is easy. It's safe. It gets you handshakes, invitations, diplomacy awards. You nod in meetings, you smile for the camera, you speak in careful lines, tiptoe around the hard questions, and convince yourself it's progress. But beneath that performance, something real is dying. Integrity, conviction, and the hope that someone somewhere still believes in truth without agenda. Most people learn how to pretend before they learn how to lead. They inherit the script. They learn what not to say. They memorize the choreography of compliance. And the world lets them, because comfort is easier than confrontation. But then someone breaks the rhythm. Someone refuses to nod along. Someone like Jaishankar. He walks in not with arrogance, but with clarity, not to provoke, but to pierce, to cut through the fog of empty statements and speak with unflinching honesty. And suddenly the room feels different. It's not louder, it's heavier. Because when one man refuses to pretend, everyone else must confront their own pretending. That's the power of presence, not the kind built on popularity, but the kind built on principle. And that's when change begins, not in headlines, not in hashtags, but in discomfort. The kind that comes when someone forces the room to feel again, to hear what's been ignored, to see what's been hidden in plain sight. Is a lonely moment, because the first man who stops pretending is always called dramatic or difficult or divisive. But history has always begun with a refusal to accept silence as peace, injustice as stability, hypocrisy. When Jaishankar spoke, he didn't say anything the world didn't already know. He just said it without disguise, and that makes all the difference. The truth isn't revolutionary. Pretending it's not there is. The world doesn't need more agreeable men. It needs men who carry stillness like steel, who are willing to be the first to say, this isn't okay. Not because they believe they can fix it all, but because they know silence is complicity. You can build 1,000 policies on pretense. You can decorate conferences with elegant language. But one sentence of truth can undo it all. One man standing in honesty can expose the performance. And when that happens, when someone stops pretending, it spreads slowly, quietly, but it spreads. People start to listen differently, think differently, speak differently. They begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, integrity still has a seat at the table. So no, the world doesn't change when everyone claps. It changes when one person refuses to fake the applause, when he lets the silence speak, when he risks his place at the table to remind the others why the table matters. And that is the moment history starts breathing again